It's lunchtime for you. So what's for lunch?
So, look, I'm waiting for my daughter to come back from, did a morning shift and she's going to pick up lunch because I said I was too busy this morning. I said, you're going to have to pick up lunch. I don't have time to cook.
I did the same thing today actually for dinner. I was like, what do I want to eat? So what I decided to do is I actually picked up dinner and lunch while I was on lunch because I was like, you know what? I'm not cooking anything today.
Yeah, that's great. I think she's bringing sushi, which I love.
Ooh,
So
I love
we'll see.
sushi.
Yeah, yeah. So we'll see what comes through the door. But yeah,
Yes.
lunchtime in Melbourne, Australia. That's where I am.
Oh, how is Melbourne, Australia?
We are heading into autumn, so fall, but it's still quite a warm summer. We've had very hot days and we've had a very long summer, which is wonderful. We love it because Melbourne can get quite rainy and quite cold when the autumn and the winter months come. So, yeah, but good weather at the moment.
That's good. Please send some my way because it would be perfect for me to enjoy because we had a brutal winter, lots of snow, lots of cold, but it's warming up. So thank God for that.
Yeah, yeah, wonderful.
So today I know we're going to talk about your personal journey, relationships, and how you became successful and how you're going to inspire others. So why don't we just start right from the beginning?
Okay.
Describe your personal journey and exactly what happened during it.
So the journey starts back in Cape Town, South Africa, where I grew up. And I grew up in the time of apartheid. So there was the segregation in the country around race, obviously entrenched in the laws of South Africa. So in, the very, I suppose, 1 minute summary of apartheid was that the country was segregated into the black population, the colored population, which is what I am, because I have mixed, I'm a biracial woman, white grandparents and black grandparents, and then whites. And that was how the country was set up, how the country had laws around segregation. So basically kept the races separate. You couldn't go, like I couldn't go into a white neighborhood, couldn't get on trains that were for whites, couldn't go to beaches that were for whites, and so on. And that was the same for black people. Um, so, the journey starts with knowing from a young age that, well, this is what my father told me. He said, you're going to have to work twice as hard. You're going to have to work really hard at school because your opportunities in this country is going to be limited. All the best jobs, all the opportunities were pretty much for the white people, some opportunities for colored people, and even less opportunities for the black people. So blacks were segregated into what they call townships in South Africa. Many of them were, I would say corrugated iron shacks put together, loads and loads of people in one spot, and extreme poverty. So that's how the country was set up. So dad told me from a very young age, he was like, you're going to have to work. You're a female, a biracial female. So that has got a couple of things stacked against you. And that means you're going to have to put in effort. You're going to have to get good grades. So I knew from very young that I couldn't muck about, right? I had to get serious about my schooling. And he also told me, he said, if you want to go on to tertiary education, like into university, you're going to have to figure that one out because your mom and I can't afford to send you to university. So there were all these things already put on the path. And I suppose when you're told that young, one of the things I remember about myself is that I was a very serious child. And sometimes I look back on that time and think, I wish I had more freedom. I wish I had been more humorous, more funny. But I remember taking life on as a very serious child and working really hard. Um, I eventually, graduated high school, and my high school was under very trying circumstances. The last year of high school, all the colored schools were closed down because there was rioting, there was protesting, there was, people were starting to fight back against the government. There was a lot of tear gassing, killing of people, police opening up fire, and just people dying on the streets. And so the schools were closed. And yet, despite the schools being closed, we were told we still had to sit the final exam. And that was very trying. What ended up happening was that some of our teachers arranged for us to come to their homes to learn and study, but all of it we had to sneak around. Put it that way, we had to sneak around. Nobody could get caught going into, because a lot of the teachers back then were white teachers, so they were inviting us into their neighborhoods to come and sneak into their homes to study and learn. A lot of clandestine activity going on around that whole time. And so I sat the exam in a military base because it wasn't safe. So they had us go into these meeting points. Buses would pick us up, take us to the military base, and that's where we wrote our final exam, surrounded by guns and soldiers and God knows what else. Very, very awkward time, very difficult time. Got through that and applied for a scholarship to go to university, which I got. And so I did my first year of university at the University of Cape Town, which came with its own challenges, right? Because that was a prestigious university. Very few Black people went to that university, and those of us who did go went on scholarships. So it was largely a white university. And that, I suppose, is where I encountered my very first confronting racism from white adult people. Because I grew up in my own colored community. I knew what was going on in the country, but we were largely in our colored community. We were protected. We lived insular lives, I would say. But suddenly we're going to university and we're exposed, you know. So that was a challenge. I do remember wanting to leave university because I was very unhappy, because I felt incredibly isolated. It didn't take long for me to figure out that I needed to keep my mouth shut, because there was a lot of sneers and sniggers when I answered questions. If I raised my hand, if the lecturer asked the question and I answered, you got the sneers and the sniggers from the white population. And I was like, you know what, I'm not putting myself in that position. So I suppose you could say the first time my voice was really shut down, because I just stopped talking. I was like, I'm just going to be quiet like a little mouse in the corner, take my notes, go to my lectures and sit my exams. But we migrated to Australia in my second year of university. And so I gave up that scholarship, migrated with the family to Australia, to Melbourne, Australia. And that was a different experience. It took a while to get used to Australia, probably 2 years, I would say, the family took to settle down. And that was because the country was so different. And we had been programmed to think a certain way. Because one of the things I remember was I was only in the country about 2 weeks or something. And my cousins had been living in the country for about 5 years before us. And we were going into the city, and I said to my cousin, I said, which train do I get on? And she said, you're not in South Africa anymore. You can get on any train. And so that's an indication of how one can become indoctrinated in your thought when you've lived a certain life for such a long time that you don't even realize, I'm not in South Africa anymore. I can go wherever I want. No one's going to stop me. No one's going to jail me. Nobody's going to arrest me or anything like that. So that was part of the reason it took us probably 2 years to adjust to the country, because we were still carrying some of the thought processes and the wounds and the fear and the worry from South Africa. And then, you know, I finished university, entered a relationship. That was good for 5 years, I would say. We were together almost 10 years. And then it was bad. There was domestic violence in that relationship. Finally I left the relationship when I was 4 months pregnant. He had an affair. He got angry like I had an affair. It was him. It was just, I caught him, put it that way. He got caught. He didn't like it. The violence ensued and I almost lost the baby. Ended up in hospital, came out of hospital, and then left the relationship. And so I basically started my new life with a baby in my belly. I was 4 months pregnant at the time. And I was about to go on maternity leave. So there was a lot of fear. There was a lot of fear because I was like, how am I going to feed this baby? How am I going to start over? My income is going to stop. But I did find a way. And I suppose that goes down to resilience and to, prepared by my life experiences in South Africa, by adjusting to life in Australia. All of these little things had, I suppose, set me up. Now, I won't say it was easy because it wasn't. I was incredibly afraid. There were lots of tears, but then I did book myself into some counseling. As just before my baby was born, I was seeing a counselor because I knew that I needed to sort my messed up emotions out, right? I was broken by that relationship. I lost everything. I had worked 2 or 3 jobs to get the house that I got. And when we broke up, the house sold at a loss. He walked away from everything, including the debt. So it all fell on my shoulders. So it was a very challenging time. But I knew that I knew I needed to sort my head out. So I went to an expert. And this is, I suppose, a message for the audience, is that sometimes we can't figure it out on our own. Sometimes you need to go to someone for help. Don't be too prideful to not seek help when you need it. And I needed help. I needed someone to help me get a hold of my emotions, the despair that I felt, the fear that I had. And so I went to see a counselor. And that was really one of the turning points in my life. So that was the journey up until, and there's obviously a lot more, but I just want to see if there's anything you want to ask me.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that because I know, like, for me, I've read about what happened in South Africa, but I didn't live it, nor did I know anyone that did. So you sharing that is incredible for a number of reasons. And the first reason is because you have someone who is telling you a moment in time that maybe we didn't experience it, but because of the way it's shared, it takes you there. And you're like, okay, I can see how maybe me with my personality type would adjust or try to live life similar to you as you're going through it. So I guess my question then, because you partially answered it, is your experiences from South Africa and from Australia up until you got pregnant, how much of that was you saying that, okay, I'm pregnant, I need to figure this out despite what I've gone through because I want to make sure that not only is my life healthy, but the life of the child I'm bringing into this world?
Absolutely. Yeah, that was so what I often say, and my daughter always smiles now when I say it, but I often say that my child saved me because I was pregnant. I'd gone through this breakup. I'd also been through lots of difficult times from the time in South Africa to, adjusting to Australia. And one of the things I knew, because I found out, I intuitively had this feeling I was going to have a girl. But then when I was going through that time where I almost lost the baby, they were taking scans and things, and the sonographer said to me, I can see the sex. Do you want to know what it is? And I said, I think it's a girl. And she says, yes, it is a girl. So I knew I was bringing a daughter into the world. And I don't know, there was a resolve in me. From the moment I found out I was bringing a daughter into the world, there was a resolve in me that said, I'm going to give this girl a good life. And one of the ways I'm going to give her a good life is that I'm going to make my life good, because I needed to be an example to her. Because, sometimes we have parents or people around us, they tell us what to do, but they don't live it. And I knew from me growing up and watching my parents, I always watched my parents and how they were. And so I was like, no, I need to be an example to my daughter as well. So I can't just say I want to create a good life and then not have a good life. I actually have to make sure that that's happening for me and for her. And so once I gave birth to her, I became incredibly resolved to give her a better life. And that was the start of me starting to look for better opportunities. And it actually led to my side business, which is now my full-time business, because I sat down, I did the numbers, and I was like, man, there's this $50,000 debt. There's this newborn baby, and I'm not earning enough money, right? I did all my numbers and I'm like, I'm not earning enough money. What do I do? So I calculated, I'm like, I need to earn $20,000 more a year. How am I going to do that? And I didn't know how to do that. But what I did do was I sat down and I said, okay, who can help me with that? Who can help me figure out how to get 20 grand more a year? And the first thing that came to mind was the people that make the decisions, the people that give people jobs. So I was like, well, that's recruiters or that's hiring people in companies. And so what I did was I started to take these people out for coffee. I would save my little dollars, the little money I could save, I would save it. I would have enough money for, say, 3 coffees that week. I would reach out to a recruiter or reach out to a hiring person and I would ask them out for coffee and say, can I have some questions? And most people, I think if you really ask people with sincerity and genuineness and authenticity, people will respond to you. And I was very upfront. I said, I need to learn a few things and I would like to pick your brain. And I think most people like people to pick their brain. We all like to share knowledge with other people. So most of them, I would say 90% of the recruiters or the hiring people I asked out for coffee said yes. And I asked them questions. And they told me specifically what I needed to do with my resume, what I needed to do to get better, how I needed to prepare for interviews, all this type of thing they shared with me. And I did that and eventually landed the opportunity. And the opportunity that I landed that gave me the next level with income increased my income by $50,000. And that shocked me because I was going for 20. So I more than doubled my target income. But what happened was that people around me, my family, my colleagues, friends, they knew the rock bottom that I'd hit. They knew I'd lost everything. And then 8 months later, they see me in this job that's paying me this really good money. And I'm starting to pay down all my debt and that people started to come to me for help. And that's actually how my career coaching business was born, because I started to help people with the same strategies I had used to land my good job. But yeah, at the end of the day, at the bottom line of that story example that I just shared was that it was my daughter motivating me to have and create a better life. I did not want her to be a victim of life. I did not want her to know some of the struggle that I had known. Now, I knew that she would probably face her own challenges. None of us go through life without challenge. But I was like, I'm going to give her a really good start. And that's what happened. It was driven by past struggles, but also a desire for future success. Those were the 2 motivating factors that took me down the road I went.
So now, Wendy, when you look back on how far you've come and now you're helping other people to achieve some of the success that you did, what are some of the obstacles that you see them struggle with, which may remind you of what you struggled with back then?
So one of the things that I struggled with, and I see everyone who comes to me struggle with, is confidence, right? When you've been battered by life, whether it's an abusive relationship like mine was, or infidelity and your relationship ends, or you're now stepping into single parenthood, when you've been battered by life, it does dent your confidence. That is for sure. I think anybody who says it doesn't is a liar, right? So I'm just going to be upfront and put that on the table. Sometimes it's not necessarily life. Sometimes you've been in a job for a long time and you're not getting opportunities, you're being overlooked. You could even have a terrible boss who belittles you, that can dent confidence. So whenever people come to me, and it was the same for me when I started out, the confidence was definitely missing. So one of the things that I started to look at was, what am I good at? Like, what are the things, can I name 3 or 5 things that I know I'm good at? And then, which of those 3 or 5 things do I really like to do? Is there one thing that in particular that I really like to do? Or are there 2 things, maybe 3 things? And then the third piece is, how can I start to shape up and frame up these skills that I have, that I'm good at, that I really love doing, and actually create a transferable skills list that could potentially go and help others. I can use in any industry, for example. So for me, if I use myself an example, I was very good with the written word. I was from the time I was a child. That was actually how I processed all that difficult times living in South Africa. I used to write about it. I wrote poetry about it. I wrote short stories about it. So the written word helped me, and I became very good at the written word. Communication, written communication in particular, is one of my strengths. So I was like, I really love writing. I'm really good at writing. And then I looked at the jobs that I'd done earlier, and I was like, every time I'm in a company, somehow my bosses always give me the written stuff to do. You know, if it's a PowerPoint presentation, whether it's emails. I've had a couple of bosses who were from other countries and struggled with the English language. They always used to let me write their communications because they knew I had this way with words. I was like, I like doing this. And then the other thing I identified was that I was always in places where I wanted to help people. So when I was a kid, I was working with disabled children. Then I worked in homeless shelters. So I was like, okay, there's another thread through my life. And this is where you start to build the confidence in yourself. When you start to look at what you're skilled at and what you're good at and where you've contributed